On today's World Insight, the Boao Forum for Asia opens with a focus on green initiatives and global recovery beyond the pandemic. As the forum hosts discussions with world leaders and thinkers, a focus on the state of the Chinese economy and the global trade environment. And a one-on-one interview with an industry leader, Andrew Forrest, the chairman of Australian mining giant Fortescue Metals Group.
It's the biggest energy source in the entire world, one which could power all of humanity several thousand times more.
Hello, I'm Tian Wei in Boao, and this is a special edition of World Insight from Hainan. China recently released the GDP growth of 4.8%. It's better than the market expectations. That's despite pressures from the global turbulence due to a COVID surge, plus the fuel and food crisis amid the Russian-Ukraine conflict. The Chinese economy did show resilience despite uncertainties. On Monday, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank began their spring meetings. Rising inflation, the Russian-Ukraine fallout, and the resurgent pandemic are front and center for policymakers. So how can nations band together in weathering economic headwinds? What are the priorities in easing financial risks? For deeper insights, let's talk to our panelists. For more on the Chinese economy and also the IMF spring meetings, in Beijing, Michael Powers, who is a professor now with the Department of Finance from the School of Economics and Management with Tsinghua University. In Shenzhen, Xiao Geng, director of the Institute of Policy and Practice from Shenzhen Finance Institute with the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And also in Beijing, Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. The most important question is, what do you make of the state of the Chinese economy according to the latest number from the first quarter? Professor Liu, briefly.
It has beaten some of the expectations because many economists and think tanks thought that we could only achieve maximum 4%. Now 4.8 is something that is a continuation of the drive of that of the last year, but quite a sort of a revival. However, if you look at all the trend, it is really something that's the growth rate has been waning. And right now, with the Shanghai lockdown and also in some other cities, definitely we're going to see a bleaker picture for the next quarter.
I see. How about for you, Professor Powers?
I think that taking things in context, I would agree in general with what Baocheng said. The figure that people are talking about, the 4.8%, is a year-over-year growth rate in GDP. If you take a look at that on a one-quarter sequential basis, and then annualize it for all of 2022, it would come out to around 5.3%, which is not far from the government target. However, I think as Baocheng said, I think that we can expect that the next quarter will probably not be as high because of a number of issues, including the problems with COVID and also the war in Ukraine.
Now, Professor Xiao, tremendous challenges, mixed bag, many say, when they look at the prospect of the Chinese economy. Your take?
Well, I think China is trying to deal with some of the short-term disruptions like the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. But there are a lot of tools to actually help the recovery of the economy and also stimulate the economy.
The disruption of supply chains and value chains in the world is very worrisome for Chinese economy. You know, most of the source of the raw materials coming from outside the country, and also the market outside the country, even though there's structural reform emphasizing on domestic consumption. Where are we now?
I think that the country has done quite well. I think that actually it's beaten the GDP forecast. In fact, for the first quarter was, as Bao mentioned, around the analyst forecast or consensus was around 4.4%. It came out to be 4.8%. Prior to that, China's GDP growth has been stable and very very robust, actually, coming out of the pandemic. I think that there's fairly broad recognition that China has adapted well to issues of supply chain disruption, and I imagine that will continue. In terms of the issue with the pandemic in Shanghai, I think that is an area for concern. But my own personal observation is that things have started to move again. I know that I order many things. I purchase many things online. There were disruptions. They seem to be coming back. What I've read is that there are some targeted efforts by the government to make sure that certain industries, certain warehouses, certain supply chains or logistical chains are able to keep functioning. Because those things are very important. Shanghai is clearly an important hub in China's economy, and it's important that the goods and services be able to proceed from there. So I think that the track record is very good.
There are several elements that can be put into consideration with regard to the Chinese economy. One is that, yes, we recently lowered the capital reserve ratio by commercial banks from the Chinese central bank, and that gives a slight more confidence to the economy, but the business community would expect more, particularly the financial market. And second, the general policy of unifying the national market is really giving right now a mixed signal whether China is going to return to the planned economy by centralizing control instead of centralized liberalization of the Chinese market economy. And much is talked about, Chinese more dependence over its own operation. So, well, in the meantime, this also gives the signal that, okay, China is going to remove those regional barriers that blocks the flow of all economic resources, which paves the right type of business-friendly environment for the world. So much remains to be seen. Of course, the third element is also the Ukraine crisis. Is it going to plague the whole world economy and hence China? So that's something remains to be seen.
We have seen the wakening up of other economies. Now, for the first 2 years during the pandemic, China, with its strict dynamic zero policy, Professor Powers, has been doing relatively well and therefore been functioning as a very strong element of the global supply chain, providing other markets which have been paralyzing in terms of production with a lot of goods that they need urgently. Now, things are changing. We see the production lines back into work in many other economies. We see global supply chain, some components of it are coming back. What would that mean for China?
If the world is recovering from COVID, from the pandemic on the whole, that's a good thing for the world, for individual countries, and for trade with China. I think that there will be some adjustments that will be made in the Chinese economy. I think that one of the things that international foreign analysts sometimes tend to overlook is that although the summary figures like GDP and unemployment rates and so forth are calculated in more or less the same way as they are in other countries, the role of the government is different. The government is able to take action to address problems and to provide targeted solutions more rapidly than in other countries. All countries have, their advantages and disadvantages in their systems, but one of the clear advantages here in China is that the government is able to tailor solutions. So, for example, with regard to unemployment, urban unemployment has been going up a small amount each quarter for the last 5 quarters, I believe. It's up to, last reported figure is about 5.8%. I think that it's fairly clear and it's generally recognized that there will be actions taken by the central government and in terms of fiscal policy, if not both fiscal and monetary policy, to make sure that there are more jobs, especially for young people coming out of school in the urban centers. So I think that one can look at the numbers, the aggregate figures, and sometimes make comparisons internationally, but one also has to keep in mind that there are differences in the systems and different ways of reacting to things.
How do you see that, Professor Xiao, in terms of so-called system differences and also the realities that is going on in the global supply chain? Some more waking up. What would that mean for everyone, for China?
If we use Shenzhen as example, even though Shenzhen is kind of different from the environment in Hong Kong and overseas, but Shenzhen basically adopted COVID-0 measure and very successfully, and so the economy here, local economy here, is recovering extremely well. So I think this is going to be good for both China and also the external economy, our external trade and investment. But I think China is facing some extra challenge in terms of the size of the economy and the diversity of the economy. And also because the government is very strong, so we have trying to do a lot of things in the medium and the long run. So there's a lot of complications, in terms of short-term implementation. So I think we are learning, and the good thing is that all the regions are trying to do different experiments. So I think on the whole, I'm optimistic. But the stimulus policy, I think for China is quite conservative, compared to those adopted in the U.S. and other countries. So I think we might also need to learn more.
Professor Liu, now it's not just the pandemic that we are talking about. We all know that it's coupled with geopolitics. You mentioned about the war. That's only one aspect of the geopolitics and the future of the geopolitics. And what would that mean for the global supply chains, technologies, IPRs? All of these are having its layered effects on the potential of the Chinese economy. Now, how do you see the urgency and priorities at this moment?
Domestically, I should say for the last 2 years, China has done remarkably well dealing with the COVID. But the winning over the first half of the game doesn't guarantee you the trophy. So politicians will have to deal with constantly the cost-benefit analysis in order to come up with the wisest decision when situation changes. So globally, we do see that, first of all, there will be spikes and continued spikes and roller coaster spikes of the commodity market when China is highly dependent on the import of fossil-based energies, because China serves continually as the engine for the manufacturing house to supply to the rest of the world. And right now, we do not see when the war is going to end, and there are a lot of pessimism looming large over such sort of situation. And secondly, how China is going to take a stance. China, because is being pushed by the world community to take a firm stand, as to whom that you would abide by. And right now, if a secondary sanction is really there to target China, which we cannot really rule out the possibility, and there can also be quite a predicament for China's economic performance. despite of all the political considerations.